Hey Lake Point, Pastor Micah here to get you caught up on the second week of our series, The Upside Down Kingdom. In this series, we're exploring what scholars refer to as the antithesis portion of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. Now, there's this haunting line in verse 20 of the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus says, "For I tell you that unless your righteousness surpasses that of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law, you will certainly not enter the kingdom of heaven." What Jesus is saying here is that unless you move past religion in the pejorative sense of the word, the legalism, the list of do's and don'ts, the kind of surface level righteousness that is about behavior and nothing more, unless you move past that to a deeper level of righteousness that is about a heart that is transformed by grace, where the driving motivation, the undercurrent of your life is love, then there's no way for you to experience the new reality of God's kingdom. And from there to the end of chapter 5, Jesus lays out 6 case studies of this new kind of righteousness at a deeper level that he's after. And so the first topic Jesus addresses is anger. In Matthew chapter 5 verse 21, Jesus is recorded saying, "You have heard that it was said to the people long ago, 'You shall not murder, and anyone who murders will be subject to judgment.'" Now, on a surface level, this seems like a pretty straightforward teaching, right? Don't murder people. Got it. But that's the problem with the righteousness of the Pharisees and the teachers of the law that Jesus was talking about in verse 20. It's a surface level understanding, and it's a surface level kind of righteousness that's all about behavior. And it's not that behavior doesn't matter, it does, but Jesus wants to go deeper than mere behavior. And so watch what Jesus does, verse 22, "But I tell you that anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment." That's pretty heavy. Jesus just compared anger to murder. What is going on? Well, let's define anger. Anger is a spontaneous feeling that comes over our mind and our body when our will is thwarted. Essentially, when somebody or something stops what we want to happen from happening. Now, by itself, anger is not necessarily a sin. Sometimes the source of our anger is something that should deeply upset us, like the injustices in our world. But even when our anger is born from a place of godly discontent or frustrations with the pervasiveness of evil, Jesus and the biblical authors warn us that playing with anger is like playing with fire. Even the Bible verses we try to use to defend getting angry, upon closer inspection, tell us not to mess with it. One of the big 2 or 3 is found in Ephesians chapter 4, verses 26 and 27, where Paul writes, "Be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you're still angry, and do not let the devil get a foothold." Now, there are really only 2 possible interpretations of "be angry and do not sin," and neither of them helps excuse our anger. Either Paul is quoting a popular saying at the time and then correcting it in the rest of the passage, which is why some translations like the NIV put those words in quotation marks, or Paul is giving us a way to deal with our anger before it becomes sinful, and that is to get rid of it as soon as possible. And then to reinforce this idea, just a few verses later in verse 31, the Apostle Paul says, "Get rid of all bitterness, rage, and anger, brawling and slander, along with every form of malice." Hard to work around that one, right? Now, maybe you're thinking, wait, what about righteous indignation or righteous anger? Unfortunately, they don't hold up. These popular Christian phrases come from 2 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 11, where the Apostle Paul congratulates the Corinthian church for their indignation towards their own sin. Now, the Greek word behind indignation is not one of the usual Greek words for anger. The word Paul uses, which we translate as indignation, means to be upset or agitated, but by grief rather than rage. Literally, the word means to grieve greatly, and it speaks of a kind of sorrow that is so strong it motivates action. So if we want to practice righteous indignation or righteous anger, Paul tells us to learn to lean into our anguish rather than our anger. Even James, the brother of Jesus, has this to say about anger. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires." Here's the point. If James is saying pump the brakes when you're headed towards it, and Paul is saying get away from it as fast as you can, and if Jesus compares it to murder, perhaps there's no excuse for allowing it to fester or be the motivator of our actions. Now, to be clear, Jesus never commands his followers to never get angry. He says anyone who is angry with a brother or sister will be subject to judgment. He doesn't command you not to get angry. Why? Well, because that would kind of be impossible. Anger is an emotion, it's not an action. And so what exactly is Jesus saying? Well, the Greek word for anger that Jesus uses is orgazomenos, and it represents a deeper kind of anger that you brood over, where you replay the offense in your head and you get stuck there and you won't move on, and pretty soon, even if you want to, you can't move on. If Jesus were speaking to Canadians, he would say something along the lines of, whoever is nursing a grudge. And so here's really what Jesus is communicating. It's not never get mad. It's whoever is angry, whoever is nursing a grudge, whoever is holding anger towards a brother or sister in the community, they will face the exact same judgment as that of a murderer. That's what he's saying. Now, when we hear that, we think, wait, what? And yet, Jesus goes on. He doesn't stop there. He says, again, anyone who says to a brother or sister, Raka, is answerable to the court. Raka is this little four-letter Aramaic word, and it's a not nice way of describing somebody. It means good for nothing. And Jesus says, whoever insults somebody like that, whoever tosses out a word like that, whoever writes somebody off like that is answerable to the court. Jesus seems to keep upping the stakes, and he's not done. Next he says, and anyone who says you fool will be in danger of the fire of hell. Oh, the fire of hell. Now, have you noticed that the description of each misbehavior is actually getting less intense? You go from murder to anger, and now we're at insults, but notice the consequences increase from judgment to the Supreme Court to the fire of hell. It's a clever inversion by Jesus. As things get less intense in what we perceive as less significant ways of being angry, Jesus is actually ratcheting up the consequences. Why? Because Jesus wants us to know it's all important and it's all connected. Now, this is tricky because it feels like overkill, doesn't it? We hear Jesus' teaching and chuckle to ourselves, oh, come on, Jesus. I know it's not good to call people idiots, but it's no big deal. And yet, Jesus says it is. Jesus says it does not reflect the heart of someone who will be at home in his kingdom. And when you start to dwell on Jesus' words, when you start to connect the dots, you realize that, wow, this anger that I carry around in my heart and that comes out of my mouth, it actually is a big deal, and God takes it seriously, and the end result of it left unchecked is hell on earth, much less hell forever. You see, murder and violence may be at the end of the stream, but Jesus wants you to know that the source of the flow begins with anger. It begins with small, seemingly innocuous insults. Jesus is saying that murder comes from this place in the heart that we've all been to. The same place that an insult comes from, or a snide comment, or a sarcastic dig. It all comes from a posture of anger. However, Jesus is doing more than just saying, don't get angry. He's acting like a doctor, and his diagnosis here is of the human condition and of the vicious cycle that we all get sucked into if we're not mindful. And so he's saying, if you want to be part of his kingdom, you've actually got to confront the disease. Christian author John Mark Comer lays out the cycle of anger this way. Stage 1, we get angry. Stage 2, our ego is wounded, which leads to stage 3, we play the self-righteous victim. We turn everything black and white. I'm the good guy, he or she's the bad guy. I'm in the right, they're in the wrong. They're the oppressor, and I'm the victim. And then what happens from there is this short step to stage 4, and this is where it starts to get really nasty. We give our heart over to contempt. Contempt, it comes out of this place of self-righteousness where you think of yourself as better than the person who wronged you. You don't just judge their behavior, you actually judge their character. We're talking about a relational posture towards somebody where you sit in the seat of the evaluator and the judge. You maybe don't say it, but you kind of think it. I have evaluated your life, the way you live, and who you are in the world, and I declare you are good for nothing. You don't matter. You are Raka. You are less than. You are subhuman. You do not deserve to be treated as someone who is made in the image of God. Your heart is given over to contempt, and despite God being the rightful judge, you decide to fill in for him. Unfortunately, the cycle only continues on from contempt, and next we move to stage 5, verbal violence. Our true feelings start to leak out of our mouths. And then what happens? Well, according to Jesus, stage 6, hell on earth. We harm other people, we harm ourselves, our own soul, we harm our community, our church, our workplace, our city, you name it. Now, most of us kind of stop the bleeding there. But if we're not careful, the cycle goes one step further. Stage 7, murder, or domestic abuse, or assault, or numerous other awful acts. Friends, anger is like a leech you get on your skin. If you deal with it right away, it's painful, but it's doable. The longer it is in your heart, though, the deeper it goes and the more destructive it becomes. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus is making the claim that the way of anger is the way to hell. The way of anger is not the way of my kingdom. And so the obvious question is, well, how do we actually break the vicious cycle of anger? Well, I love Jesus because he goes right from making you think deeply to two really creative, practical, small steps we can take. The first one is a hypothetical scenario that Jesus presents in verse 23. And it's kind of funny. Jesus says, therefore, if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother or sister has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First, go and be reconciled to them, then come and offer your gift. Why is it funny? Well, Jesus is teaching near the Sea of Galilee up in northern Israel. And the altar he mentions, well, there was only one in the first century, and it was at the temple in Jerusalem. And so the hypothetical scenario is that if you're a farmer or whatever, you're a peasant up in Galilee, and you make your annual pilgrimage down to the temple in Jerusalem, you walk the 80 miles with your sacrifice, which was an animal, since animals were a form of currency in the ancient world. It was a goat most of the time. And so you walk to Jerusalem with your pet goat, you go to the temple, you walk up the steps of the altar, and there's the high priest, and you're about to make your sacrifice, and all of a sudden you remember, oh my gosh, I'm upset with my neighbor. We're both farmers. We have a well that's right on the border of our property, and we don't agree on who owns it. We always bicker about it, and so, oh my goodness. And so in Jesus' scenario, he's saying, listen, here's what you do. You just leave your goat with the high priest, and you book it 80 miles all the way back home. You knock on your neighbor's door, and you say, hey, we need to talk. I'm sorry. We need to hash this out. And hopefully you hash it out. And then, much to your goat's dismay, you run the 80 miles all the way back to Jerusalem to make your offering. Now, it's funny, but it's funny because it's extreme, and Jesus is saying that's how serious it is that you and other people reconcile. Jesus is saying that your relationship with God is tied up with your relationship with other people, whether you like it or not. And from there, he basically says the same thing with a little twist in the next hypothetical situation he provides in verse 25, where he talks about two people on their way to court. And the point of the second scenario is that we need to deal with our anger quickly and not allow it to be something that festers. And so here's the big idea. Whatever it is you think anger and outrage are helping you accomplish, love will do a better job. If you think it's helping you raise your kids, if you think it's helping you get the best results from your employees, if you think it's helping you get through to your spouse and change their behavior, and if you think it's helping you fight for a social cause or a political issue, whatever it may be, I want you to know love will do a better job. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus isn't just trying to help us avoid murder or anger. He's inviting us into a life where love and reconciliation grow so strong that things like contempt and bitterness and hatred, they can't survive. The Sermon on the Mount is not about behavior modification. It's about heart transformation. Well, friends, thanks for listening. Enjoy jumping into discussion questions. I'll see you next time.